Russia has officially blocked access to Instagram. The move is in response to Meta's decision to allow Facebook and Instagram users in some countries to call for violence against Russian soldiers and Vladimir Putin over the invasion of Ukraine. Social media companies have cracked down on hate speech in recent years, but the war has put pressure on Silicon Valley to publicly condemn Russia, ultimately creating what now some refer to as a, quote, new digital Iron Curtain. For more, I want to bring in Elizabeth Dwoskin. She's a Silicon Valley correspondent for The Washington Post. Thanks so much for joining us, Elizabeth. I've been reading your reporting, and one of the things you say in this here, you called it in this back and forth, you called it a real, quote, tit-for-tat battle. What's going on here?
I did call it a tit-for-tat battle because it's like this series of escalations between Russia and Silicon Valley platforms that essentially have this big tension where they have all these Russian users, 80 million on Instagram. The Russian people really love these services and are depending on them to communicate to family, friends, activists, and people around the world. And Russia has to balance that with also social media companies antagonizing them. In this case, you have major Russian propaganda outlets, social media, such as RT and Sputnik, that have huge presences on the social media companies. And what actually on the social media platforms, on YouTube, RT is like a CNN. And so what you have are U.S. social media companies deciding to crack down on some of these Russian propaganda outlets. That sparked retaliation from Russia, where especially against Facebook, they said if you crack down, because they were fact-checking the propaganda, and they basically said, you need to stop fact-checking. And Facebook said no. And then they said, okay, well, we're going to cancel access to your service. So a week ago.
Yeah, we've been watching this kind of back and back. It seems that these tech companies are back and forth. It seems that these tech companies are in a way kind of making up the rules as they go along.
Well, that's what we wrote, in the sense that they don't seem to have a good sense of what are the rules for global warfare? How should we, is there a playbook? And maybe there isn't a playbook, because honestly, no one expected for the world to be on a brink of a World War III in Europe. This wasn't something that was really expected or anticipated. But what you have is Facebook made a couple decisions that really provoked retaliation from Russia. The first decision was they allowed praise of a neo-Nazi battalion that Facebook formerly considered a hate group, a Ukrainian battalion, but they normally don't allow praise of. But they allowed praise because this group was fighting the Ukrainian resistance against Russia. And then last week, they changed their hate speech policy very quietly to allow for calls for death to Putin and to Russian invaders. So they have a policy which says you can't call for violence, but they said we're going to make an exception. So in some countries, in the Ukraine, you can say call for death to Putin, call for death to Russian invaders. This is obviously the company trying to navigate these really thorny challenges about how do you protect speech in wartime. And so they made this decision quietly. They told their content moderators, and the decision leaked. And then when Russia heard about it, they canceled Instagram, which is hugely popular in Russia, way more popular than Facebook, which they canceled the week before.
And on Facebook, Russia now is opening a criminal case. What is Russia doing at this point?
Russia has opened a criminal case against Facebook, whatever that means. They've called them like a threat to the country. That's from Russia's leading prosecutor, their attorney general, effectively. I'm not exactly sure what that is going to mean because Facebook doesn't have a headquarters in Russia. But I think that, there's this tension now because you have all these very powerful people, like on Facebook. On Instagram in particular is a place where Russian celebrities and influencers live. And some of those people are allies of Putin. They are the elite of society. And so they don't want their Instagram to be canceled either. So I think this move, certainly it's very unpopular with the Russian public in a way also that that is probably why they waited for so long to balance Instagram, to actually cancel Instagram. And right now, a lot of those influencers, I'm understanding, they're saying that they're going to be using Russian social networks or Telegram, which has not been banned, to continue to post. And it's just, I think it's incredibly sad. A lot of the influencers have also locked their accounts as well.
In the past, we've seen tech companies that have really resisted cracking down on Russian state-backed channels. Why is that?
Well, what they did is, after, if you recall, about 2016 election, the Russian Internet Research Agency, this Putin-backed operation, essentially sowed large amounts of disinformation in the 2016 election. Some people argue that it might have tipped the election towards Trump. But in any case, there was this big disinformation crisis that the tech companies had to deal with. And the way they deal with it is they started pouring all this research into all these covert accounts that were secretly Russian accounts, pretending to be American, sowing disinformation. But then they realized, wait, we have this other issue, which is we also have these overt accounts, these Russian state media channels that have huge audiences and are putting out propaganda 24/7 on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter. And at that moment, they said, okay, well, should we treat them like disinformation and just not allow them on the platform? Or should we do something different? And what they decided to do was instead to label them. So since 2018, channels that are controlled by, that get government funding on social media have this label which says they're government backed. And that doesn't just include Russian state media, that includes China state media. I think even Al Jazeera gets a label. The BBC and PBS get these labels. And that really, really upset organizations like the BBC and PBS when the tech companies decided to do this, because they said, wait, we're this democratic media. We're not controlled by our governments. Why are you putting us in the same bucket as Russia Today? And yet the tech companies felt that they couldn't find a solution that, at least would allow them to justify why would they take down state-backed channels in Russia and not PBS. To me, it seems kind of obvious. They could have found a reason. One, that Russia had been engaging in disinformation warfare against the United States, and that's reason enough alone to block their propaganda channels. But I don't write the rules. They made a label instead. And that label didn't seem to have curbed their traffic, because like on YouTube alone, for example, Russia Today, RT, in Arabic, English, and Spanish has over 16 million subscribers until YouTube cracked down on Friday. So they got these massive audiences through social media. And then those audiences were used to really sow pro-Putin, pro-Russian propaganda all the way leading up into the invasion. You saw this flurry of activity from Russian social media state channels, which again, to many readers, despite the label, to many users, these just look like regular news sites where people get news. And you see this flurry of stories leading into the invasion, these pro-Russian narratives. And that is going on basically up until about a week into the war, when the social media companies started to crack down, culminating Friday with YouTube banning all of the channels worldwide.
It's so interesting. We're watching so much of this war unfold on social media. And as you point out in your article, we're seeing companies who are forced to really take a side. Elizabeth Dwoskin, thank you so much for joining us and for your context. We appreciate it.